Good morning to you all. This is an English MA second semester class, and today's text is T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral. As we already know that in the evening session we have had a number of classes when the classroom interface was possible before the suspension of classes and the lockdown. And there we have seen how T.S. Eliot came to write Murder in the Cathedral. Nevertheless, since it is quite some time, we will take a brief look at how he came to write Murder in the Cathedral. T.S. Eliot is renowned as a very important, if not the most important poet in the modern period, and he was born in 1888 and he passed away in 1965. And during his youth and mature years, he had witnessed the two great wars, the First World War and the Second World War. And of course, this experience of being a witness to the two great wars definitely had a tremendous impact on the kind of creative writing that he produced, that is, his poetry and his plays which were written in verse. Now let us take a quick look at T.S. Eliot's background, which has a direct impact on his writing Murder in the Cathedral. Eliot was born in St. Louis on the river Mississippi in Missouri, and his father, William Greenleaf Eliot, was a bricklayer. So they had their own brick manufacturing industry and they were a very affluent family. But this family was unique because it was also interested in the health and education facilities which could be provided to the people living in St. Louis, particularly the women of that area. And to this extent, Eliot's mother, Charlotte Champ Eliot, was a very dedicated social worker. So, the family was interested in the overall upliftment and well being of the society. So, this was a kind of milieu in which T.S. Eliot grew up. He was the youngest of the children of the Eliot couple. Eliot's family was interested in education not only in the primary level but also at the university level. So, where we find his mother very eagerly instituting and supervising women's education right from the primary level, his father, like his grandfather, was one of the chief sponsors of the Harvard University, where T.S. Eliot himself was a student in his youth. Where the health facilities were concerned, his mother also supervised many hospitals and maternity homes so that women got some kind of good medical attention in the St. Louis of the late 19th century. After T.S. Eliot completed his education in Harvard, where he studied philosophy primarily, he moved over to the Sorbonne in France, where he studied for some time before he went back to Harvard and then returned to Oxford University to continue his studies as a scholar when in 1914 the war broke out. And it was during this time that he wrote his famous Prufrock and Other Observations, which were published as an anthology. Later on, he published Poems, another anthology, which was soon followed by essays, which are very famous and which include Tradition and the Individual Talent and Hamlet and His Problems. In Tradition and the Individual Talent, as you shall see in your third semester class, where this essay is included, T.S. Eliot is talking about a sense of history, the historical sense, which is, he says, not only a sense of the present, but of the past. It is not the pastness of the past, but of its presence that is important, and how tradition comes to have a bearing on a creative artist, which includes a poet. In Hamlet and his problems, T.S. Eliot speaks about the objective correlative, which is the technique of writing poetry, which he advocates and practices. So, if we look at these two essays together, as far as Murder in the Cathedral is concerned, we find that there is this historical sense which is operational on T.S. Eliot when he writes Murder in the Cathedral. It is not only history, but it is the tradition to which the martyr Thomas Becket belongs. And there is a tradition of writing about Thomas Becket. In this tradition, just as there is historical documentation, because Becket was a real life character living in the 12th century, there is also literature written about him. And of this literature in English, two texts can be conveniently mentioned. One is the Canterbury Tales, in which the pilgrims are actually making a pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Thomas Becket. It is the same Thomas Becket who features as the protagonist of Murder in the Cathedral, about whom Geoffrey Chaucer is writing in the Canterbury Tales. And immediately before T.S. Eliot, we have the poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson writing about Thomas Becket's martyrdom. So there is this tradition of writing about Becket, to which T.S. Eliot is now going to add something new by virtue of his individual talent. And in Tradition and the Individual Talent, T.S. Eliot also writes that there is a lot of information in the mind of the creative artist. But at a particular point of time, certain factors come together, as a result of which a pressure is created. And it is that pressure which will determine that out of whatever he knows, which elements will be selected. Not all of them will be taken, certain elements will be selected, And out of those selected elements and their respective proportions will emerge a new work of art, which will be a new contribution to the existing literature. At the same time, it will alter the pattern of the existing literature. And Murder in the Cathedral is a wonderful example of this theory of tradition, the individual talent, and this poetic creativity which makes a new contribution to tradition. And in order to do this, T.S. Eliot uses not prose but verse. And why verse? Because verse enables the poet to express what prose cannot do, because the poet has the license to compress, to put in a lot of ideas in very little space, to have layers of implication, just as Shakespeare and his contemporaries had in the poetic plays that they wrote. So there is this possibility of implying a lot of things within a little space, so that when the play is seen, the different people, the different individuals in the audience can interpret the same performance in each one's own way, depending on the capacity of the individual. This is the great flexibility which is possible in verse drama, because a lot of images, symbols can be used which have the ability to express a lot of ideas, emotions, feelings which are there in the poet. Therefore, these images and symbols act as the objective correlative about which T.S. Eliot speaks in Hamlet and his problems. So, T.S. Eliot also believes that traditionally he draws directly as a poet and as a playwright from the tradition that had been set by Shakespeare, the university wits, the immediate followers of Shakespeare in the world of drama in the English language. And he has been greatly influenced and inspired by them. He has also written a number of essays on these dramatists collectively as well as individually during and after the time when he wrote Murder in the Cathedral. So, when we come to Murder in the Cathedral, therefore, we find that there is a tremendous knowledge, experience, and personal interest on the part of T.S. Eliot when he writes this play. One important factor that we must keep in mind is Eliot's great work, The Wasteland, which he wrote in 1922. And he wrote Murder in the Cathedral to be performed in the Canterbury Festival of 1935. So, chronologically, 13 years separate The Wasteland and Murder in the Cathedral. Before The Wasteland, we have Prufrock and Other Observations and Poems. Immediately before The Wasteland, we have Gerontian. Immediately after Wasteland, we have The Hollow Men. And Gerontian, The Wasteland, and The Hollow Men can in themselves be seen as a sequence in which T.S. Eliot is exploring in greater detail what he had hinted at in his earlier poems. To be precise, he is speaking about the spiritual barrenness, the spiritual wasteland of modern men, which got reflected in the First World War and which led to a complete dislocation of the spiritual firm hold that people had before the First World War. But the modern times, right from the first decade, were actually pointing towards the First World War. Therefore, as a young man, T.S. Eliot was very sensitive to the spiritual barrenness of the modern urban individual, be it man or woman. This was because of his upbringing. And in his upbringing, there was yet another element which is of interest for us, and that is the religion practiced by his family. You must know that Christianity is not one uniform religion. There are many sects and subsects in Christianity. Broadly speaking, there are the Catholics and the Protestants. Among Catholics, again, there are the Roman Catholics and the Anglo Catholics, among other kinds of Catholics. But the Unitarians, to which sect T.S. Eliot's family belonged, believed in only the existence of the divinity of God. They did not believe in the divinity of either the Son of God, that is Jesus Christ, or the divinity of the Holy Spirit. That is why they do not believe in the divinity of the Trinity. They believe in the divinity of only one, that is God. So they are Unitarians, meaning they believe in only one, unit, single. But T.S. Eliot's nurse, Annie Dunn, was an Irish lady who was a Catholic, a Roman Catholic, and she went to the Roman Catholic Church. And when she went to church, she took little Tom with her. So, as a little boy, he was exposed to both kinds of Christian practice. Unitarianism, which was very, very sparse, very simple at home, and Catholicism, which was very elaborate, very complicated, and exceptionally grand and magnificent when she went to the Catholic Church with Annie Dunn. And there he discovered that Jesus Christ was worshipped as the central figure, and he was worshipped as the Son of God, born as the Son of Man. But this worship of Jesus Christ was absent in his family's practice of religion, and therefore he was greatly attracted by the incarnation, that is, the avatar of the Son of God being born as the Son of Man. And this stayed with him. So, when he wrote The Wasteland and he was obsessed with the spiritual barrenness of man, he was actually gradually moving towards a great event which happened in his own life in 1927. So, between Wasteland in 1922 and Murder in the Cathedral in 1935, a personal step was taken by Eliot in 1927, and that was his conversion to Anglo Catholicism. The Anglo Catholics are also Catholics, but for them, the highest place of governance is the cathedral at Canterbury and not the Vatican in Rome. So they are Anglo Catholics, and this began from the time of Henry VIII. But we are talking about the 12th century when there was no Anglo Catholicism, there was only Roman Catholicism. So, excuse me, at that time, England was a Roman Catholic country. This is something you have to remember. Although T.S. Eliot was an Anglo Catholic, he is writing in Murder in the Cathedral about a Roman Catholic Archbishop, Thomas Becket. Now, to go back to a bit of history, Thomas Becket was a great friend of the King Henry II, and Henry II made Thomas Lord Chancellor of England, which was like the post of Prime Minister and a very powerful political post because the king wanted a very responsible person whom he could depend on, who would look after the political affairs of the state. Later on, the king made Thomas Becket the Archbishop of Canterbury, which was the highest religious position in England. And he expected Thomas Becket to carry on with both the offices together. But after he became Archbishop, Thomas Becket gave up the post of Lord Chancellor and began to feel that his responsibility as the spiritual leader of the people of England was great and he had a great duty to perform. As a result of which, he stopped doing whatever the king asked him to do. He used to judge and decide on the basis of the welfare of the people of England. Therefore, the inevitable conflict between Thomas and the King Henry II happened. Because the king was politically powerful, he tried to use the legal system and tried to imprison and give severe punishment to Thomas Becket for disobeying him. Thomas Becket ran away to Europe and became an exile to live there for 7 years before he decided or he was attracted to return to England on the 2nd of December 1170, and he was murdered on the 29th of December 1170. So that is the historical background of the play. Therefore, we will see how T.S. Eliot is actually using the character of Thomas Becket, who had known a lot of political power, who had become the spiritual leader of the people of England, and could undertake his own spiritual quest in search of fulfillment of his birth and existence on earth. He would try to follow what God wanted him to do. And in experimenting with this character of Thomas Becket, T.S. Eliot would try to see whether a kind of spiritual fulfillment could be found for the people of the modern times who were all suffering from spiritual barrenness, a spiritual emptiness. And the opportunity came to him when George Bell, Bishop of Chichester, invited him, commissioned him to write a play for the Canterbury Festival of 1935. Before writing Murder in the Cathedral, T.S. Eliot was already a poet and he had tried a bit of theatrical activity as well. He had written the choruses for a pageant play called The Rock and the uh, he had also written another fragmentary play called Sweeney Agonistis, as you can say, preambles to Murder in the Cathedral. So when we come to Murder in the Cathedral, we find that the play is in two parts and there is an interlude between these two parts. In part 1, we have Thomas Becket, we have the three priests, we have the charwomen of Canterbury, and we have four tempters. In part 2, we have Thomas Becket, the three priests, the charwomen of Canterbury who form the chorus, and the four knights. And of course, there is a messenger in part 1. Between these two, there is the interlude in which Thomas Becket delivers his Christmas sermon in 1170. The scenes are set between two places. The whole of part 1 is set in the Archbishop's Hall in Canterbury, and the date is very specific, the 2nd of December 1170. The interlude is set in the cathedral where the sermon is delivered. In part 2, there are two scenes. It is divided between, in the first part, the Archbishop's Hall, where part 1 was set, and in the second part of this same part 2, the second scene, you could say, is in the cathedral where Archbishop Thomas Becket is murdered by the four knights. Now let us take a look at certain sections of the text. It begins with the chorus, and the chorus comprises the charwomen of Canterbury. Charwomen means women who do cleaning, washing utensils, cleaning houses of people. So they are temporary, casual staff who are poor, who are not paid a lot of money, and who are always afraid because they belong to the lower strata of society. Therefore, these very scared women form the chorus of this play because T.S. Eliot wants to use their position in the beginning to begin a journey for the common man through which they will be educated in spiritual understanding in their own way. So, their level of understanding of what they witness is the lowest level. The next level would be that of the priests, and the highest level would be that of Thomas Becket. So, these three levels of spiritual understanding are going to be shown by T.S. Eliot in the process of this play. So, the chorus says, "Some presage of an act which our eyes are compelled to witness has forced our feet towards the cathedral. We are forced to bear witness. Something has compelled them to come, just as something will compel Thomas Becket to return to England after 7 years." And they also mention the barrenness of the place, and the land became brown sharp points of death in a waste of water and mud. The new year waits, breathes, waits, whispers in darkness. The new year waits. Destiny waits for the coming. So they are waiting for the arrival of something. That is the dramatic tension that is created by T.S. Eliot right in the beginning of Murder in the Cathedral. And they say that destiny waits for the coming. And what is this destiny? Destiny waits in the hand of God, shaping the still unshapen. So something is going to take shape. What is that? It is the individual's understanding of the spiritual condition in which he is, and an understanding that the individual has to get out of that spiritual condition of barrenness and try to find some sort of fulfillment. And so the chorus says, I have seen these things in a shaft of sunlight. Destiny waits in the hand of God, not in the hands of statesmen. These three lines are important. Destiny waits in the hand of God, shaping the still unshapen. So they are anticipating something, but what it is, they still don't know. So the unknown is something they have to wait for. I have seen these things in a shaft of sunlight. Now, this is a reference to the Bible and a reference to what happened to Jesus Christ, the first martyr. So, that is the tradition to which Thomas Becket is going to subscribe. And that is the tradition which is being upheld by T.S. Eliot in Murder in the Cathedral, which is actually another contribution to literature upholding that tradition. What is it? Then we must take a quick look at Christology, that is the study of Jesus Christ's life and work. When Jesus Christ was crucified, he did not die immediately on the cross. Excuse me. He had to wait. And why did he not die immediately? Because he was aware of himself as the Son of God, born as the Son of Man. He was under the impression, excuse me, that he could save mankind because he had been sent by God. His birth was actually necessary for his death. His death was the more important event. In order to die, he was born. And now that he was on the cross, about to die, that great purpose for his birth was going to be fulfilled. Why was he born? God sent his own son to be born as the Son of Man in order to show mankind how to live an ideal life. Therefore, he was setting an example. His life was exemplary. And therefore, he had that element of pride in him. But pride is one of the seven deadly sins. And because he was proud, he did not know what it was to surrender completely in all humility to God's will with a capital W, W-I-L-L, capital W. That is God's will. He did not die. And for as long as he suffered on the cross, there was a very dark cloud over the hill of Calvary on which the cross was there with Jesus Christ crucified on it. And when Jesus Christ realized that he had to surrender himself completely to God and acknowledge that he was nobody, everything was happening because God wanted it to happen, that he surrendered himself to his Father. And he said, My Father, into thy hands I surrender my spirit. In complete, total surrender, in total humility. It was then that a shaft of sunlight pierced that dark cloud. This cloud is also called the cloud of unknowing, not knowing that you have to surrender to God. So once you know, then that cloud is pierced and the sunlight fell on Jesus Christ's face and he died immediately. So it is that event that is being referred to in this line. I have seen these things in a shaft of sunlight. The shaft of sunlight is that light which pierced the cloud of unknowing in Jesus Christ's own life. And the cloud of unknowing is a work of Christian mysticism. And after that, the chorus says, Destiny waits in the hand of God, not in the hands of men, and definitely not in the hands of statesmen. Therefore, given the choice between the political power and the spiritual power, Thomas Becket would better follow the path of spirituality without surrendering to political threats, because destiny waits in the hands of God, who is the spiritual ultimate power, not in the hands of statesmen, because they are material, they are temporal, they are temporary, but God's power is eternal. So they say, "Come, happy December, who shall observe you? Who shall preserve you? Shall the Son of Man be born again in the litter of scorn? Son of Man, capital S, capital M. Will Jesus Christ be born again?" Why do they ask this? Will there be another martyrdom? Because after Jesus' birth, people have again made mistakes. They have not learned a lesson from his life, his death, and that is why many more martyrdoms have become necessary. Whenever people become spiritually barren, whenever people become spiritually vacant, there is the necessity for spiritual rejuvenation. That is the time when there is the necessity for another martyrdom. That is what is referred to by the chorus, who ask, "Shall the Son of Man be born again in the litter of scorn, in the dirt of scornfulness, in the dirt of barrenness?" Has it become necessary for another repetition of the pattern of Jesus' martyrdom? Then the priests enter and the priests inform the audience. The first priest says, 7 years and the summer is over, 7 years since the archbishop left us. The second priest is worried and informs us that he was in France. The third priest says, there is nothing conclusive in the art of temporal government. So there is only violence in the political rule, there is only duplicity, and there are frequent malversation. Where the king rules or the barons rule, the strong man rules strongly, the weak man rules by a lot of duplicity and caprice of uh, alternating between good and bad. But there is no peace for the common man. It is exactly then that the messenger comes to inform that the archbishop is returning to Canterbury. He has already arrived in England. So the priests are now very eager to know what has happened. The first priest thinks that the exile is ended and the archbishop has now made up with the king. They have become friends once again. And the messenger says that there is no reunion, but the king has a different matter and the archbishop has come because he has his personal reasons. So the first priest gives us a piece of very important information regarding pride. He says, I saw him as chancellor, flattered by the king, talking about Thomas Becket, liked or feared by courtiers in their overbearing fashion, despised and despising, always isolated. He was never one with the rest of the barons. His pride always feeding upon his own virtues. He was proud because he was virtuous, and that pride is also a sin. Pride drawing sustenance from impartiality. He was impartial, so he was proud of his impartiality. Pride drawing sustenance from generosity. He was generous, so he was proud. Loathing power given by temporal devolution, wishing subjection to God alone. So his virtues, his impartiality, his generosity, all these made him proud. So he was essentially a very proud man. And therefore, pride is something which he has to overcome. The second priest says that we can lean on a rock. The rock of God is beneath our feet. He refers to the rock because the church is like a rock. It is solid, it supports, it allows someone to hold it, to cling on to it and survive. Jesus Christ is also sometimes likened to the rock. Therefore, the second priest is talking about clinging on to a strong support. And the chorus is very worried because the third priest says, for good or ill, let the wheel turn. Because the turning of the wheel can never be stopped. The wheel is always turning and turning and turning. Like in India, we have the idea of the turning of the wheel of Kal, of Samay, and we are all fixed points on that wheel. So when our point goes up, we are up there, and when our point goes down, then we go down, and we have to accept it. But this wheel is not the wheel of a vehicle, of a cycle or a motorcycle or a bus or a train. That vehicle moves as the wheel turns, but this wheel turns in one point, and the center is fixed. The center is God. The chorus says, leave us to perish in quiet. They are accustomed to their life of poverty, their life of insecurity. They are habituated, they are afraid of any change because they think that if a change comes, it will be a change for the worse. So they are happy with what they have. They don't want anything worse than what they have. They address Thomas Becket. You come with applause, with clapping. You come with rejoicing, people are happy. But you come bringing death into Canterbury. So, the historical event of Thomas Becket's death, which is now going to be repeated in the performance of Murder in the Cathedral, is being hinted at. A doom on the house, a doom on yourself, a doom on their world. And they don't want any further doom because they say, but now a great fear is upon us, a fear not of one but of many, a fear like birth and death, because when we see birth and death alone in a void apart, birth implies right the risk of life for the mother and the newborn child. So death and birth are both very scary. They say that ourselves are lost in a final fear which none understands. So they are very, very afraid. Then the second priest advises everybody, particularly the charwomen who are very excited, they are very agitated, they are talking among themselves, they are expressing their fear, and they are being instructed by the second priest to put on pleasant faces and give a hearty welcome to our good Archbishop when Thomas enters. And as soon as he enters, he says to the priests about the charwomen, they know and do not know what it is to act or suffer. They know and do not know that action is suffering and suffering is action. Neither does the agent suffer nor the patient act, but both are fixed in an eternal action, an eternal patience to which all must consent that it may be willed and which all must suffer that they may will it, that the pattern may subsist. For the pattern is the action and the suffering, that the wheel may turn and still be forever still. They are all fixed on a wheel, and their action is to turn on the wheel and be patient, because patience itself is action. And they have to suffer, because Beckett will suffer on one level personally. The others will suffer as they watch him suffering. So they have their own way of suffering as they watch him. And he says that they know that this is what is going to happen, but they do not know that in watching me undergoing suffering, they will also participate in it, because they will be patient and they will watch. And in patient watching, they will also suffer in their own way. That is what he says, that they must consent, that it must be willed, and which all must suffer, so that they may will it, because they are participating in God's will. And this is the pattern, and the pattern must subsist, it must go on, because the pattern is the action and the suffering, and the wheel must turn. And Thomas also says that this patient waiting as the wheel turns, and they are all fixed on the wheel, the priests, the charwomen, Becket, even the tempters, the messenger, all of them, the knights, they are all fixed points on the wheel. And God is the still center who is making that wheel turn. The center is fixed. The center is the center of light, and that light will be shed on those fixed points when they will realize their role in this patient waiting for the action to take place. So the patience is prolonged, but the end, when it comes, will be simple, will be sudden. But when will it happen? It will happen when God wants it to happen. It will be God given. So Beckett points out, end will be simple, sudden, God given. So, till that end, from now, this entire duration of time, meanwhile, the substance of our first act will be shadows. So, this entire span between now and then, that murder will be shadows, and the strife with shadows, the conflict with shadows. What are these shadows? The shadows are different kinds of temptation, of overcoming these personal, internal temptations, which will now be externalized in the play. The interval is therefore heavy, heavier the interval than the consummation. This gap is heavy. The end will not be so heavy. So he says, all things prepare the event. Watch. And as he says, watch, he is saying this to the charwomen, as well as he is saying this to the priests as well as the audience, which is very important. And we shall end here. And in our next meeting, the second part, we shall look at the four tempters and their interaction with Thomas Becket. So I thank you once again for being here with me. Thank you. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves.